YouTube fandom community, David Bowie fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about David Bowie's 1971 masterpiece, Hunky Dory, released on RCA Records. This is a 2015 RCA reissue on limited edition gold vinyl. Ooh, so cool. This is one of my favorite David Bowie albums, and for a lot of people, it's one of their favorite David Bowie albums too. It features some of his best songwriting. It's basically his start. Yeah, he had a couple albums before this, but like this really is like the best place to start. Um, so really brief. We're not going to do a whole history of Bowie here, but like in the late 60s, Bowie was having a really hard time trying to get a hit. He ended up putting out his self-titled debut in 1967, and it was full of like vaudevillian show tune type tracks. Kind of, I wouldn't say campy, but like very like lots of vaudevillian type piano playing and like just like dance hall music, old school dance hall music. And while it's certainly not terrible, it's amazing that it came out in the time that it did. It doesn't really fit in with the era. Flash forward a couple of years, Space Oddity is a humongous success of a single, but a lot of people see that as a flash in the pan. And the album comes out, it's got some really great songs on it, but does nothing. The next album, The Man Who Sold the World, excellent album. And this album came out of a formation of a group of guys who got together and made this really big rock sound. The whole album was a big crunchy rock sound. Fascinating album. Some of his best songs are on that album too. It's Superman, The Man Who Sold the World, She Shook Me Cold. It's a great freaking album. And then this happened. So in early 1971, Bowie went on a promotional tour to the US for a couple of weeks to promote The Man Who Sold the World. And as he came over, he felt completely re-energized and reinvigorated and like all his creative juices were just like exploding because he was discovering America firsthand. He went on a bus trip from DC to California and across the way just got inspired. And so, so much of what he loved about music came from America, and here he was for the first time experiencing all this in person. And that effect on him was humongous. And a lot of this album reflects American themes like Andy Warhol, the Velvet Underground, Bob Dylan, etc., etc. So his creative energies were completely renewed. So he got back and he reformed, got together with some of the guys and basically formed the band that became the Spiders from Mars. Except Rick Wakeman was on the piano, and his piano playing on this album is absolutely stellar. Phenomenal piano playing in this album. This album in general is a piano-centric album. It's very driven by that instrument, which apparently was a Bechstein piano that Hey Jude was played on. Some of the early Elton John albums were made with this thing. Early Genesis, and they get some Supertramp later on. And apparently the piano was like 100 years old at this point, so that piano had been around for a while, and it sounded magical. I think that really carries well over on this the spirit of this album. But so they were at Trident Studios, where most of this album was recorded. The guys in the band were Mick Ronson on guitars, Woody Woodmansey on drums, Rick Wakeman on piano, and then Trevor Bolder on bass and trumpet. And then Bowie on guitars and piano, other stuff too. It was produced by Ken Scott of the Beatles fame. You know Ken Scott. He also was just hot off of doing All Things Must Pass at this point, so he was kind of like a big deal. And he ended up working with Bowie for a handful of albums in the early 70s, especially Ziggy Stardust. It was also co-produced by the actor, or David Bowie. This album, it was kind of a sleeper hit when it came out. It did well with the charts. I say well. It did much better than his last album, but it wasn't like a grand slam until after Ziggy Stardust came out, and the people went out and bought this thing because they wanted more Bowie and realized this was a great album. And then Life on Mars got reissued as a single, which like skyrocketed up the charts. I mean, and this album eventually followed suit. The album hit number 3 in the charts after Ziggy Stardust came out, and the Life on Mars single also hit number 3 in the charts. And there's a great video of him as Ziggy, the pale blue suit and the big blue eyes and the crazy orange hair. Yeah, an amazing time for Bowie. So the album cover artwork on here was inspired by a book of pictures of Marlene Dietrich. I think I'm saying her name right. He was basically showing off. He was inspired by that, so they went with this like image of him looking kind of like 20s, 30s, 40s, film actor, which I think is pretty cool. And I think, to me, it's kind of like part two of The Man Who Sold the World, because he's like laying in that long dress coat on the couch, on the fainting couch on the other album. So for me, this is kind of like part two of that. And he wanted to call the album something sort of cheeky that would sum up the feel of the album. And he thought Hunky Dory was kind of a Britishy slang that summed it up, and so he did. Um, so yeah, this album, it's absolutely one of my favorites. I mean, it's the whole way through this album. There's no bad songs on this album. There just aren't. Top to bottom, it's a fantastic LP. So let's just jump into it. The first track on this thing is one of his biggest songs that wasn't even like a giant single when it came out, but Changes, Changes, which a lot of people think was inspired by The Who's My Generation with the stuttering there. But it was released as a single January 7th, 1972, which was the day before Bowie's 25th birthday. So he was 24 when this came out, basically 25. It's a super pretty ballad type song. I mean, it's got these really sweeping pianos and strings, and really like just a beautiful melody. I mean, it goes places musically that really hadn't been experienced in pop music before. Bowie's vocals are just warm and lean and tight. The production is tight, and I think that tight drum sound really gives this whole album, and this song in particular, a certain crack, a certain appeal, a certain, you know, a certain feel. That's the best way I can put it. It's striking, and I think the intro riff that happens once in a while is just one of the most gripping like pieces of music, because it begs for your attention. And the lyrics are about, you know, going through changes. Doesn't get much more simpler than that. You know, they're quite aware of what they're going through. But the way he sings, "Oh, look out, you rock and rollers," is kind of like, you know what, I'm setting myself either apart from this whole scene, or I'm going to lead this scene pretty soon. Just watch out. Just wait for Ziggy Stardust to come out. You'll see. Fantastic song. Absolutely adore this song. And this was probably the earliest Bowie song I remember from being when I was a kid. I was hearing Changes on the radio. Oh, You Pretty Things, again, another straight up classic. You get that insanely detailed, beautiful piano throughout this whole thing. People have been reading into this song over the years as like really existential. I guess he was kind of inspired by, you know, Nietzsche, or Nietzsche, however you pronounce it, and Aleister Crowley, the occult Satanist guy, best known from Led Zeppelin. Apparently Peter Noone did a version of this song, which I had no idea about, and it did pretty well. It hit like number 12, and Bowie plays piano on it. I had no clue about that. So there's also multiple varying reports about the inspiration of this song, whether it was just about philosophical, existential themes. Bowie's wife Angie seems to think it was about him going to these different gay clubs in England and London. Apparently there was a club called Sombrero. He just observed the scene and just soaked it up and enjoyed the culture and the clothes and the atmosphere and just being who he wanted to be and being comfortable as that person. You know, so there's some, I think there's different aspects of his life and influences that make up the DNA for this song, which make it a very interesting track. I mean, the chorus on this thing is just unbelievable. When he hits the "Oh, You Pretty Things," the beat, the shuffle to it, the energy, the craziness in his voice, it's classic Bowie. Like, it doesn't get any better than that. Such a good song. Harvey Danger does a pretty good cover of it too. Came out about, I don't know, 12 or 13 years ago as an EP track, I think, or B-side to something. Check that out, Harvey Danger. 8-line poem. This song basically is like the tail end of "Oh, You Pretty Things." The piano kind of weaves into this thing. And it's cool. It's literally a poem that's 8 lines, and it's about like I really love the words in this poem, because he's really good at crafting something like a really small situation and kind of like delving into the details. It reminds me of like a Thomas Hardy book, because there's like, you know, I remember reading one of his books and he had like 2 pages about a glass of water or something. But like, you know, he's talking about like this cactus in the window is like kind of like watching over the window and the rest of the room, and you know, it came from this shop. Who's going to buy this cactus? But I think that was totally inspired by his American run. Here he is in America where there are cactuses, or cacti, whatever you want to call them. And I get a really big like Neil Young feel on this thing with that slide guitar. It reminds me of when the Stones would do a country song. You know, that kind of like the English feel of doing an American country song, which I really like. And I think he pulls it off well. And his voice on this thing is cool. He hits some like country tinge with his voice, which I think works really well. And then you get this next song, Life on Mars. I mean, what more can be said about this song? It's absolutely one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever put to tape. I think it's easily one of his best songs, maybe even his best song. Well, one of his best songs. Um, there's a funny story about this song. So apparently in the late 60s, 67, 68, he was commissioned to write English lyrics to this piece of British music, or this piece of French pop music. And so he did. And it kind of went nowhere. And then Paul Anka bought the rights to the original song and then reworked it himself and then sold it as My Way to Frank Sinatra. And Bowie was like, oh, that sucks. And so he kind of made a parody of My Way. So in a way, he's making a parody of a song that was ripped off by him, which was him trying to be trying to put different words to a song that wasn't his. So it's almost like he's making a parody of a parody which wasn't meant to be a parody. Inception. Darkest Timeline. So yeah, I think he was trying to do something kind of parodying that aspect, but in doing so, made one of the best songs he's ever written. I mean, the build-up is remarkable throughout this entire track. The whole song is tender, it's baroque, it's grand, but it's also delicate, and it's trippy, but it's striking. It sounds like a radio drama from the future that's trying to sound like the past. Nothing sounds like this. There's just nothing that sounds like this song. It's absolute magic put to vinyl. Instant classic. Nothing compares to something like that. Kooks. Cool song. Just a fun little cute song that he wrote about his son when his son Zoe Bowie, Duncan Jones, was born. This is a head-bobbing little tune, lots of acoustic guitars, really happy, kind of happy-go-lucky, is that the phrase? Kind of song. The piano playing again is more that like vaudevillian style, which I really enjoy. The guitars are hitting all those really like comfortable notes. The whole song's just very sweet. It's a nice message. Quicksand. This is an intense song. I mean, it's really, really dark. And it references a lot of weird, creepy stuff. Again with the Aleister Crowley, and again with like there's a whole bunch of weird organizations that are mentioned in this thing. This weird subject matter. But I do love the acoustic guitars, love the melody, and I think it's a classic, underrated Bowie song. I think when people talk about some of Bowie's work, I don't think Quicksand pops up enough, but it's definitely worth talking about. I mean, there's that line alone, you know, don't believe in yourself, don't deceive and believe, knowledge comes with death's release. Like, holy crap. It's a crazy line. And then you start side 2 with Feel Your Heart, which is a complete 180, which wasn't meant to be the first song on side 2. A song called The Bombers was meant to be the first song on side 2. But then he went with this instead, probably just to lift up the slightly deep section of Quicksand before that. This song I easily can see on his 1967 debut. It's got that dance hall feel to it. It's really got a big, bright, you know, charming, uplifting vocal, and I think it's really fun. It's not my favorite song on the album, but I totally dig it. I think it's a cool way to start side 2, and it kind of leads you into the rest of the album. Kind of a fun way to go. Again, Rick Wakeman's playing on the piano. It's just absolutely stellar on this thing. Andy Warhol is the next track, and I love this song. It's such a cool song. The guitars on this thing are fiery and tense and played with such conviction. And the story goes, apparently before this album came out, Bowie came to America and played the song for Andy Warhol, who was super upset by it. He kind of just looked at him and went, mm-hmm, and walked away. And Bowie was like, you know, shook up by that. I mean, because he was like a big fan. And apparently some of Andy Warhol's people came over and they said, hey man, look, you kind of like made fun of Andy there. Like, he's a sensitive guy. And Bowie was like, oh, whoops. Apparently they made up later on after that, because they actually met up again, and Andy Warhol liked Bowie's shoes. And they started talking and things were okay. But yeah, I absolutely love that story. So the beginning of the song starts with Ken Scott leading off an introduction to the song, being like, all right, we're going to record Andy Warhol. And Bowie was like, no, it's Andy Warhol. He was saying it wrong, and Bowie was correcting him, that he cracks up. But I love that introduction. The drums on this thing sound like something's just being slapped over and over again. I can't tell if it's like if it's somebody like just like slapping their leg over and over again, or what that sound is. It's sort of some sort of, you know, they have those like drumsticks that are like a bunch of sticks rolled into one. I forget what they're called, but maybe it's something like that. But I like that sound a lot. Song for Bob Dylan, really cool song. For me, it's kind of like musically, it reminds me of All the Young Dudes. So I'm going to call it All the Young Dudes Senior, or the grandfather of All the Young Dudes. It's just a cool track about Dylan's influence on culture and society, and on Bowie, and how important I think his work was in the '60s at that time. I think it influenced so many people, and it's still being felt today. But yeah, this is a nice, inspiring song about Bowie's inspiration from Dylan. I think it's a cool track. Queen Bitch, what a song. I mean, right on the back of the album, he even says, "Some VU, White Light returned with thanks." I mean, it is straight up Lou Reed, Velvet Underground. Super heavy rock guitars in this thing. And it's the only song on the album that's like totally electric guitar driven. And it really sticks out, but in a good way. By the time you get to this point, you were kind of ready for a little bit of a change, and this thing throws you right in there. Yeah, I absolutely love this track. And the lyrics, again, have been the subject of conversation, I guess. People have been trying to figure out what the song means for years. A lot of people think it's about a prostitute. Bowie's watching a friend of his or somebody he knows try to get a prostitute, and then how that prostitute is like doing his or her thing, and Bowie thinks that he can do better than that, either as the prostitute or as the person trying to get the prostitute. Interesting track. I really, really dig this one. The wordplay on this thing, the feel, the beat, the drums, the whole thing is totally alive. They must have had a great time doing this song. Because most of the songs on this album were done like within 2 or 3 takes. That was it. Like they rehearsed them a bunch and they went in and they like there's one story where they were all like super ready to do one song that they knew they had prepared for, and Bowie came in and said, "Now we're gonna do this other one," and they were like, "Oh crap!" So like the tension and the anxiety in the air lends itself to a whole different kind of spirited track. And I think Trevor Bolder, or one of the guys, mentioned that like having that anxiety there gave the songs a different kind of electricity that wouldn't be there otherwise, and that makes the album feel special, which I totally agree with. The last song on this album, the Beulah Brothers, there's a story that Bowie came back from going out one day, and he came back and told Ken Scott, "Look, we gotta make a song for the American market that's just about nothing, and they're gonna read into it." That's one of the rumors. The other rumor is that the song is actually about David's brother Terry. So the world may never know what the actual story was, but some people may look at these lyrics and say, this is some of the most brilliant stuff ever written, and some people may look at it and say, that's all rubbish. So we're not ever going to know, but I really do like this song a lot. The, "Oh, and we're gone, we're so turned on," like that line is just so fun to sing along to. It's so cool. Yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, this album for me has always been easily one of my favorites, and up until recently, I've never owned this on vinyl up until owning this reissue. I've never been able to find it. It's eluded me for years. Most of Bowie's work on vinyl is very hard to find, and when you do find it, it's beat to hell. This album did chart again in 2016 after Bowie passed away, or went back home to his mother planet, but it hit number 24 during a 3-week stay, which is pretty cool. And one other thing I did like about learning about this album is that, like, when he was doing this album, he didn't have a label. He was in between labels. And as his work was getting shopped around, RCA picked it up and said, "Yeah, we can give this a shot," and signed him up for a 3-record deal. Because their whole thing was like, "Look, we got to get away from like just country and Elvis. We got to like spiff up and hip up our canon of work here and get with the times." Let me show you the record itself, because I think it's really, really far out. And it does come with the insert. I swear it's in there. So this was cool. So you got the lyrics, which I thought was pretty far out. And the vinyl was awesome. Gotta admit, the vinyl is super cool. So you got this really nice, it kind of shows up on the camera there, but it's gold. It's like a gold-colored vinyl. And instead of saying RCA in the middle for the white lettering there, it says Bowie, which is awesome. So, yeah, big fan of this album. For me, to be honest, I'd probably give this thing a 9 out of 10, and on some days a 10 out of 10. I think the reason why I would give it a 9, maybe because I'm not super stoked on Feel Your Heart. I think it's a cool song, but not my favorite. Who knows? Maybe if the Bombers was on there, it might have been a whole different album. But yeah, still great. I'm gonna leave it with a 9 out of 10 because giving it a 10 out of 10, yeah, it gives it room to grow. I think if it's a 9 out of 10, but it's easily one of my favorite Bowie albums of all time. And I would love to know what you guys think of this thing. Yeah, let's talk about it. That's all I gotta say. My name is Giggens. This has been Album Reviews with David Bowie, Hunky Dory. And thank you so much for watching. Tell me about this album, your thoughts, your memories, the first time you heard it. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Look out, you rock and rollers.